Good afternoon. Good afternoon. and welcome. Going on. Hello. Thank you, Jonathan, for technical assistance. Once again, welcome, good afternoon and welcome everyone to this regular meeting of the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency for June 3rd, 2024. With that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I would like to invite Director Natoli if she would kindly lead us in the pledge today.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this is not on my script, but I'll go ahead and add it anyway. I'd like to introduce our newest director, Carolina Hernandez, who will be representing LA County Water District 36 on the to my far right. Welcome, Director Hernandez. Continue with our announcements for today's meeting. This meeting is being conducted in person at the SCV Water Agency Pine Street Training Room. As a convenience to the public, members of the public may also participate virtually by logging into the agency's Zoom meeting. Any member of the public may listen to the meeting or make comments to the public using the call-in number or Zoom webinar link. In the event there is a disruption of service which prevents the agency from broadcasting the meeting to members of the public using either the call-in option or internet-based service, this meeting will not be postponed or rescheduled, but will continue without remote participation. The remote participation option is being provided as a convenience to the public and is not required. Members of the public are welcome to attend the meeting in person. We do have members of the public present in the room today, so I'd like to remind them there are public comment cards in the back of the room or in the lobby. I'm not sure which it is. Please fill one out if you intend to make a public comment. That would help facilitate the process. The procedures for today's meeting are as follows. I will introduce each agenda item. Staff will present. I will ask for public comments. I will then ask for discussion and questions from board members. Once concluded, I will ask for a motion and a second. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call for roll call votes. Almost all board members are present. Our representative from the city of Santa Clarita is running late and will be here soon, I hope. And that happens to be Jason Gibbs. And also, I've also already introduced our newest director, Hernandez. We will continue the meeting following the guidelines of public comments. Members of the public may comment as to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency that are not on the agenda at this time. We ask that members of the public wishing to comment on items that are listed on this agenda do so at the time each item is considered. Madam Secretary, I have no public comment cards for this item. Do we have any public comments online for item 1.3? There is not. We can move to item 1.4, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, modifications to the agenda from our board? Looking right, looking left, seeing none, the agenda is hereby approved, and we can move to item 2, approval of the consent calendar. Before we take a vote or take a motion and a vote, are there any public comment on the consent calendar? Madam Secretary. All right. I would entertain a motion for approval of the consent calendar, which contains 2 items: the minutes from the March 20 meeting and adoption of a resolution adjusting the meeting time of the regular Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency board meeting. I would entertain a motion for approval of consent calendar.
So moved.
We have a motion by Director Natoli and a second by Director Marks. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
By name, please state your vote. Cooper.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Hernandez,
Approved. Dr. Marks,
Yes.
Dr. Natoli. Aye. And President Martin.
Yes.
Give the consent elements have passed.
And Mr. President, if I could just express my deep thanks to the board for moving the meeting start time from 2:30 to 1. It seemed like a lot to you here, but it will really help in my commute back downtown.
Excellent.
So thank you. everyone.
Even though that eats into my nap time, I'm.
I know it's a big sacrifice.
All right. We now can move on to item 3.1, consideration to approve Carson Curtis Ranch Storage LLC replacement well. We have any public comment on this item before we pass it to our staff for a presentation?
Not.
Okay. So you're the presenter on this, and I not listen.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Vergoose, please proceed.
This item before you is the first of these well permit approval steps that we've gone through as an agency. The consultant, I understand, and the are online or are on the phone if there are questions that we need to forward to them. The staff report is pretty self-explanatory. The consultant followed the outline of our geologic report requirements, so a review of the submittal, pretty straightforward, even for the first time. We do not find that this replacement well would pump more than the well it is replacing. The old well will be destroyed, and we're recommending to your board that it be approved.
Any public comment on the presentation, Madam Secretary?
There is none.
Good. Any discussion amongst the board or questions? Director Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have some questions, Mr. Beatrice. First, why is the habitat restoration necessary? Is it because of the previous sand and gravel mining, or is it another reason?
My understanding is it's because of the reclamation of the former mine. But of course, we can check in with the owner or the consultants even.
Okay, and why is it anticipated that restoration will take 25 years? That's probably close to 10 times longer than it would normally take. So why 25 years for restoration?
Well, part of that is getting the vegetation up and running and up and growing on its own without as much irrigation. But,
That's where that 2 to 3 year period. They typically in restoration, it's established within 2 to 3 years. And after that, there's the monitoring and shouldn't be a need for additional irrigation after that. There might be a need to replace some plants here and there. That 25 years is stunning.
well, we would have to dig into those details more than to answer your question.
And then it says that after the life of this well, it would either be decommissioned or replaced. And again, if it's for habitat restoration, why would it need to be replaced?
Well, that's something we have to check into. It's possible that they may need water there in the future if other plants need to be replaced, but Director Natoli, I'm not entirely sure, so we'd have to drill down into that to find out more.
And if I could get answers to that, it would be appreciated.
The rest, we have Tracy Brownfield, must raise her hand. Is she one of the well owners? Or Mr. Rick?
Probably, yeah. The name isn't familiar, but maybe it's somebody else's name.
Are you okay with, President Martin, are you okay with allowing?
It sounds like the applicant or the consultant has raised their hand.
For a public comment, for a response or a public. Well, we'll take public comment.
Ms. Brownfield? you ready?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you so much. I wanted to make sure that I was operating this properly. Thank you so much for noticing my hand and taking my comment. Sorry about the dog in the background. So I am the project proponent, and I own a company called Land Veritas, and we develop wetland mitigation banks. We developed a large wetland mitigation bank in northern LA County called the Peterson Ranch. It's about 4,000 acres, and another one at Elizabeth Lake. And the property that we're planning to restore is over 140 acres. And it's going to take many, many years to go through the project. It's going to be a phased project. And so that's why water is required over a very long time frame.
Thank you. I have actually toured the Peterson Ranch site several years ago with other Los Angeles County Department of Regional Planning employees and was very impressed. We were very impressed with the site.
Thank you. I may have met you, so I apologize. It's hard for me to recognize people on the video.
That's all right. I didn't recognize your name. It was many years ago, so I'm not surprised we don't necessarily remember each other. So it's going to be a land mitigation bank, and then that of course means you won't be developing the entire site at once, correct?
That is correct, and it's also our hope over a very long time frame to add adjacent properties so we can restore more than 140 acres. But you know, that's going to take a lot of time. But we envision this as a very long-term project to restore this stretch of the river, and that's why the water supply is so important.
I understand that makes perfect sense now. And then I'll skip my next question and go to the next question that you might be able to answer, Tracy.
Okay.
This is riparian habitat. Doesn't it depend on groundwater?
It really, I mean, and Steve is a hydrogeologist who can answer this better than I can, but the water table doesn't have it. My understanding is that you need to get the plants established, and then they develop very deep root systems, so they become drought tolerant. And so the groundwater is not as important once all of the plants are established. And again, you know, part of our plan, the river is full of tamarisk and arundo and all kinds of very bad invasive plants. And so the first thing we're going to do is remove all of those invasive plants, and then they get replaced with willows and mulefat and native species, which, you know, will form a better canopy and are a more drought tolerant type of species.
Sure, that makes sense. But if you're not sure if they'll depend on groundwater, my point of the question is if it's right, if riparian habitat does depend on groundwater, then for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, then riparian habitat to be restored would be a groundwater dependent ecosystem, which we should be tracking in our GSP. So that's my point for that. And I'm not sure answer that question or if it's something we need to watch, but if it is groundwater dependent ecosystem, don't we need to monitor it?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? This is Steve Reich.
Yes.
Hi, I'm a hydrogeologist, and I work with Tracy, and I helped to develop the report to present for this item. And I think your point is very well taken, and that is that the riparian vegetation that will be planted will be groundwater dependent. It is a phreatophyte, the willows, the willows that will be established and mature. They will eventually be reliant upon groundwater when available. And I think it's very important in this project where, and I think Tracy just mentioned that, which is that establishing those communities with the irrigated water is really the only way that would be possible to get it started. And like I think even you, Director, indicated, as you know, it's a very long time, 25 years. And obviously the water's not needed for 25 years. It's really needed in the beginning for 1 or 2 years. And then as we develop those riparian vegetation, we move on to different areas, and then that same water demand will just kind of roll along as new vegetation is created. And then, you know, with respect to the model and keeping track of that, I certainly think that the groundwater model that you guys, that the GSA has developed is adaptable to addressing changes in phreatophyte use along the different drainages, and should certainly be addressed in the future as those communities become more mature.
That makes sense, Mr. Reich. Thank you. And also thank you, Ms. Brownfield. Then the last question I have is probably for you, Mr. Viergoots. There was in section 4.2 of the technical memo, or maybe this is you, Mr. Reich. Please explain how screening impacts groundwater levels. So that section mentions that the well will be screened at 2 different locations, 2 different depths. I'm a planner, I'm not a hydrogeologist. How does screening impact groundwater levels?
Well, I think that Rick did a really good job of summarizing the memo itself in terms of where the waters will be drawn from in the aquifer. And I think that's the idea of identifying where those screened intervals are. And that's why we were specific as possible with with the GSA. So if there are screens in the shallow alluvium, then those screens will tend to draw from the water that's in the shallow alluvium. So anything in that 60 to 80 feet down will come out of what we would term to be underflow or flow that might be associated along outside the banks of the river. And then the deeper screen, the screen that goes down into the Mint Canyon formation, it just will draw its water from a different formation. And in all likelihood, the majority of the water coming out of this well will be from the deeper formation, just due to the typically drier conditions. So it's really, when we talk about screened interval, we're referring to what is the source aquifer for the water that's going into the well.
So not all of this works, Director Hernandez, but so you have one pipe and it has screens in 2 different places. You don't have 2 different pipes for the water coming out for the different levels. How does the groundwater know it totally come out for?
I like the way you face that, you place that question. I think that's really good. The groundwater flows, it's all driven by water level, and that creates a gradient, and it's all based on the hydrogeologic properties of the formation surrounding it. So typically in the Mint Canyon formation, it would be a little bit what we call tighter, which would be a smaller hydraulic conductivity. And up in the near surface formation, it might be a little bit more coarse formation and a little bit higher water. So that those hydrogeologic properties and the gradient of the water in the well will determine the physics of the rock, and the well will determine where the water comes from.
Very good, and I appreciate how you explained it, so my little planner brain understood. Save that, Mr. Wright. Thank you, Mr. President. I know I no longer have any questions, but
That's not my point, actually. I think we strayed off of what our normal procedure is for public comments. It was very useful to have the project proponent and their consultant online to answer questions. I would suggest next time something like this comes to the board, you introduce them ahead of time and advise the board if you have questions, they're standing by to ask questions, not dive in as a public comment. It kind of is not within our purview, I think, to allow public comments to go into a Q&A format and extend as long. But it was useful information. I'm glad they were there. And if it helped Director Napoli to answer our questions, it's all good. So we will continue with the discussion amongst the board, except we do have one public comment that came in a little late. Sandra Cattell would like to make a comment on item 3.2. I'm sorry. It's not about this item. Okay. So we have no further public comments. Any further discussion from the board? Director Cooper.
Rick or whoever can answer these. 800 gallons a minute, you're talking 1.8, 1.9 acre feet a day. So most of this water is going to the operation of Curtis Sand and Gravel. Is that correct? To the operation of the mining operation.
Traditional.
And Curtis has been out there, I know, for longer than I've been in town, and it's been a long time. So it's a small portion of this water that's going to the restoration of habitat. Most of this is the Curtis Sand and Gravel.
I think Curtis Sand and Gravel, that well at 800 GPM no longer provides service to Curtis Sand and Gravel. Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but that well is no longer operational at 800 GPM, so they plan to replace it for this irrigation well.
Right, their well is no longer operational. So this is going to go to Curtis Sand and Gravel and to the restoration of the habitat.
Steve, can you help?
No, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt in, but no, the Curtis Sand and Gravel is no longer a viable operation. And so the sole purpose of this well is, as we've stated, is only for the mitigation and establishment of the riparian vegetation and the habitat that we discussed today, as well as there's a 10 acre feet for incidental use on the property. But it's not for commercial use of Washington Sand and Gravel.
And so none of this is going to go off the property that is owned by Curtis Sand and Gravel. None of this is going to go to CMEX property.
This right now, and I think it's included in the submittal, is it's all on the Curtis Sand and Gravel. What we talked about earlier is wanting to expand. That might be adjacent properties in the future, but what we've established this application for is for the 100 or so acres of mitigation land, whether it be riparian along the channel, a little bit of upland. Tracy talked about, where the mule fat would go, but currently the development is identified for properties on the Curtis Ranch with hopes to, yes, you're correct, in the future, if possible, to expand it off the Curtis property.
You say expand it off the Curtis property, but not just CMEX. Is that?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit.
You would expand it off of the property in the future, but not to CMEX property. Is that correct?
Is the CMAX, is that the property on the other side of the river to the south?
No, it's north or south. Yes, it's to the south side of Curtis.
Yeah, unless Tracy's on, I'm not familiar with. I know where the Curtis property goes up and crosses Lang. I've always looked on the north side of the river. I don't know if Tracy can add to any plans she might have on the beyond that.
There's no plans to include the CMEX property in any restoration.
And so
I mean,
can we exclude it in this document to make sure it does not go to CMEX?
I don't have a problem with that.
That would be having to exclude that because CMEX has to go back and do their own work for water supply out there. So could you include that somewhere in the document then, Steve? It cannot be used in CMEX property.
Sure.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right, before we go on, I'd like to, for the record, just say that Vice President Gibbs joined the meeting during the presentation and the follow-up discussion, so sure, we are at full attendance of the board. We continue with comments and discussion, Vice President, Director.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that the application process was understandable and useful. Considering it was the first time, that was good to hear. I thought a good question was raised about the creation of a GDE or maybe restoration of a GDE. I think as we go into the next GSP, I would like to understand how and if this organization is responsible for created groundwater dependent ecosystems. Just thinking of our sewer new drop in the wastewater issue, you know, it's all about, you know, was it there before? It may be about, was it there before? Or if it's created, do we have to take care of it forever? Not a groundwater it's an ecosystem now, but it's being restored. You know, where's the line? They talked about upland. We talked in the last meeting about the distinction between upland, not groundwater dependent, and the, you know, more groundwater dependent locations. I want to make sure that this doesn't become an obligation to water it forever through drought if it's not a true GDE. And I'd like to understand what the state would require. So that's for future, but that is what prompted me was Director Natoli's question about that. And then lastly, just, I know no one in town wants the CMAX mine. I do caution, or I have concern about us commenting on land use as a water agency. We have historically not commented on water use. I think the plus of this is the water use is going down. And the application served its purpose. But I personally don't want to be commenting on whether a project has merit or not, or if it's too big or not, or if it's in the right spot, if there's enough, you know, plants, if it has enough road access. That's for people like our Director Gibbs and the county people to decide. So I appreciate you making sure with the owner's consent that the water is for on-site use. That's fair game, but I just don't want us to spend a lot of time commenting on whether we like the project or not, or whether how we would do it differently or anything like that going forward. So thank you.
Director Marcus.
Above and beyond. This reach is a losing reach. And sure, sir. That this could create a demand on the basis that doesn't exist. It hasn't historically existed. I don't know what the nature of the operation was. They were pumping water. I imagine they were using it to rinse the material that they were mining. That probably some portion of that was evaporated, some portion was probably infiltrated back into the groundwater. So this is increasing the overall basic net basic usage beyond what it had been to this restoration activity. I suspect it is. It sounded like this was going to be a ecosystem thing that others would be availing themselves of. And maybe that works out from a net usage if depending on what it is that being mitigated. I understand how the overall balance, potential impact on the basic on the net basis.
Director Marks, the way it's been presented to us, the way it makes sense to us is that the well is now no longer operational. It was a large producing well. Significant amount of water to Curtis and gravel. At some point, that well went down, and this new well would replace that well for this purpose of the mitigation that we talked about. In terms of the overall water balance, the numbers suggest that it's a net reduction in water balance or net reduction in water use. Though that older well has been out of commission for a few years. This proposed use would still be lower than the historic use of the other well.
I think I understand it would be less than the historic pumping. But I'm not an expert on what the nature of sand and gravel mining is. My suspicion is that some portion of that water was infiltrating back into the groundwater base.
Right.
And so are we
I
creating the restoration of this habitat, a net increase in basin demand. I don't know if I call it restoration so much as establishment of new habitat.
So if I'm understanding you right, thank you, that helps. I think you're talking about return flows, whether the return flows from the former sand and gravel mine, less or more than the return flows from this new use.
That would be an element of it, yes. So and similar to Director Goodside, I have, during the wet years, you've got a lot of water coming down out of Solidarity Canyon. But you have 4 or 5 inches of precipitation, very little flow coming down that canyon. I would think that potentially see willow die off, potentially cottonwood die off, depending on that's the groundwater. The alluvial there. And stage and the regional impact on the groundwater and the ecosystem. I'm sure It's a difficult situation.
So you're concerned about possibly creating habitat.
That historically wasn't there, yeah. And cannot. It's not viable under natural circumstances without the use of irrigation.
Right. I see your point.
Yeah, I'm hearing, what the board is concerned about. I think it's a unique circumstance, right, where. Um. This approach to establish habitat, I think everybody would be in favor of, but when
Right.
it potentially comes at a cost of having to potentially increase the groundwater availability to continue to maintain that or restrict other uses of the ground. Habitat that wasn't necessarily there. I definitely hear the concern. We'll go back and do some thought and some research on that about this idea of creating habitat and the responsibilities of that going on in the future. Something we can look into.
Director Cooper.
I guess when I look at what the report says, it's when Curtis had it. It was 525 gallons a minute, something like that, they're well produced, and that produced all the sand and gravel that they did, which is, it says it used 210 gallons per ton. This well seems quite large for the project that is being proposed. 800 gallon a minute well is a big well. This is just a habitat restoration. And then the report looks to me as it says, and if there's a change of ownership, they'll notify us. Curtis is not in production anymore. I want to make sure this well can only be used for that habitat restoration. What I don't want to see is CMEX come in, purchase Curtis's property and have an 800 gallon a minute well that they feel that they can use. I think we need to make sure that that is restricted in some manner, because they have to go through the state to get their water supply for their project. It's not our job, that's their job, and I don't want to see an end run come around by trying to get the Curtis property and the use of that well. So I think we need some restrictions in there. I have absolutely no problem with restoring the habitat. I think that's great. I just can't imagine, 1 million gallons a day, 1.2 million gallons a day of habitat restoration water. I just think that seems very excessive. And I think there's some other use that's being looked at for this water here. So I would ask that you look at that and make sure that what we're doing is restricted.
Mr. President, Director Cooper, if I could just say, what the applicant is proposing is a 350 gallon per minute smaller well. Instead of a 20-inch well, they're proposing a 12-inch well. Well,
Maybe I read this wrong.
350 gallons a minute.
Where did I see 800 in it?
Well, that was the
The original.
Oh, the original was 800. It
Yeah.
went dropped down to 5 1/4 when they were mining over the years.
But your point is still valid.
Okay.
How do we,
Restrict the use of the well to what it's saying in here is to restoration habitat.
I'm gonna have to ask, Mr. Bunch, the question. I'm not sure. I don't have to be that line.
Well, I think we have to look at it. I'm not prepared to answer the covers all.
Okay.
I think where you were going. That direction, we need to take a look at all the concerns. See, and talk to the applicant, see.
I'm sorry, I did read that incorrectly, but yes, I'd like, still, I think it's important.
I think
By the way, I
Right.
had I'm sorry, I had my mic off when I answered the prior question about whether we could limit it to on-site use, and I'm not sure, I want to make sure the applicant heard me that it's only with their consent. That I think we can do.
Director Hernandez has question.
Thank you so much. I want to go back to Director Natoli's first, statements, and I appreciate your summation, Mr. Cole, because I think that is exactly kind of what we're getting to here, what I've heard from fellow directors. In addition to, how it's being, I think, was concerned about why there have a 25-year horizon. So if you could just denote that as well, I think that was a question to me in terms of the restoration. I know the applicant attempted to talk to us about different aspects of that, but again, that speaks to maybe a larger scope than what was, being mitigated here or not, but if we can also, while we're looking at some of those other issues, really look into that time frame, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Vice President or Director Gutzak.
Sorry, just running up the list for the legal counsel to look at. Again, I'm concerned about, how do we navigate conditions on all of these? This started as a well permitting process. And when we talk about can't use it offsite, maybe there's thoughts about, can't transfer to future owner, limiting the time. That gets into stuff we may not legally be able to do and may not want to do. So I just want to add time.
Yes, and I heard your earlier comment about we're not in charge of land use.
Yeah.
If that's serious.
So, yeah. Just if the board can have that appropriate information on how to decide this in the future, because I'd hate to start putting conditions on and that not be something that we really want to do. Or maybe we can, I don't know, but whatever legal decides.
Unless there's any further questions, I have kind of a broader question. This property changed ownership. It had a functioning well that collapsed. Did it collapse after the ownership change?
Yes.
Okay, was it used by the current owner for the habitat restoration irrigation before it collapsed?
I know I believe it was tested by the current owner. But we would have to check with them.
I'm just curious about what authority we have to question how groundwater well is used after it's in a replacement well situation when land ownership changes from one hand to another, a different use by the new landowner. Right now, this is an application for a replacement well.
Right.
And we've had a lot of discussion about whether we think the use of that water is appropriate. Or what we can prevent the next landowner to do. Is this something within our purview to question and to rule on?
Well, I think we need to look back at the governor's executive order, which I don't have in front of me, but I believe that that's focused on impacts to the base.
Okay, but if
So that's what we clearly have the jurisdiction to do. Beyond that, I'd like to work with my colleagues here.
if the existing well was used by the current landowner for the function that they will continue with a replacement well. Because it's a replacement well, we now can take a look at what the water is being used for.
If that's what we're talking about, is that we're gonna have to go back and look at that. Initially it was. It's a replacement well, it produces as much water as the old one, it's less or more, it's less, but now we're talking about. Possible property conditions.
I guess we certainly would need a ruling on that, whether we're appropriate in question.
Yeah, well, I do think it's, the first thing that we went to here was the possibility of creating a GE, I think that is within our purview to talk about that, because it's how much water is going to be affected in this in the future. And I guess I feel equally strongly that, as I just said, we don't have to turn a plan loose, so there's some line in between there. We need to figure out as best we can where it is.
Going back to your point of basin impact. A replacement well is gonna have a lower capacity than the one it's replacing. Is
Yes,
that not?
but my
That's
concern,
So
my
one would
understanding
think-
of the concern was not that. It was the new use that would come from the plants that were planted.
Okay.
I appreciate the input. Obviously, this is, as acknowledged earlier, kind of the first go around on one of these. This one has some unique qualities to it, for sure, because of the mitigation aspect, so. I think what we're gonna ask for is a little bit more time to go back and try and research the questions that were asked and develop some responses for those, and we'll obviously be in contact with that as well. Discussion, so. I think that's where I'm feeling the board is that right now, before acting on this application.
Yeah, questions were raised that we don't have a good answer for that. Not that you would be expected to have it.
Yeah, and in some aspect, we're charting new ground here. GSAs haven't been around that long, and so
Yeah.
we're gonna try and understand the rules and responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, all the points that have been raised, beginning with Director Nicole and carried on by other directors, I think are good points. I'm just curious about what our authority and responsibility. Okay, so this item will not move forward for a vote because we get some answers to the question.
So
It'll come back.
if I could, Mr. President, I'm sorry, Director Gibbs, did you have?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, staff, how do you think at our next board meeting that you would have some answers for us?
I think so, given that we're currently meeting quarterly. Steve, Wright has been good with, getting this information that we requested. I expect we'll also reach out to county and city to see what they have in terms of their planning documents. It's that question. So we'll need some time to do that.
Then, Mr. President, I would move that this item be continued to the next regularly scheduled.
We need a vote on that.
Since she's made it as a motion, yes.
Right. Director Nicole just made a motion. If I'm not mistaken. We have a second on, Vice President Gibbs second the motion. Unless we have any further discussion, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
When I find it, please state your vote. Director Cooper,
Yes.
Woodside,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Councilman Gibbs,
Aye.
President Martin.
Aye.
This item will be presented to the next regular board meeting in October.
That's what you need, more work. Okay. So, well, that brings us to item 3.2, discussion for framework for updating the Santa Clara River Valley East Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan and SCV GSA fiscal year 2024-2025 new budget items. And our presenter is Mr. Vergoose. Mr. Vergoose.
Thank you, President Martin. Now it's been exceedingly long time. Now that. Your board at our last meeting in March, we talked through. This presentation. And it happens to dovetail with budget consideration, which is 3 today. So this is our current game plan for moving forward. So first slide. Big picture, the state has done a good job chipping away at the 120 GSPs. They've approved 74. That's about 60% of them. We're in that 60%. So go team, we're doing well. And give me next slide, please. For our basin, like expect all basins, they got approvals. We got our approval, but we also got these things that EWR, like it or not, the terminology is recommended corrective action. Sounds very unfriendly, but that's what's written into the legislation. We need to respond to these, but we've got a solid GSP, but we do need to respond to EWR's questions. Next slide, please. So we have time. We don't have a ton of time, but we've got approximately 2.5 years to prepare the 5-year update to the GSP. Knowing how things go, that time will go by fast. So we're recommending we get going on it now. There will be a public process required. We'll need to develop that. We certainly don't think it needs to be as detailed as what we did for the GSP adoption. I would expect we have 1, maybe 2 public workshops. Next slide, please. Just a quick recap. So DWR had 4 key components. And I'm gonna step through these. I've got a slide for each, not a lot of detail, just to be efficient. So their first was on the hydrogeologic conceptual model and the status of sustainable yield. We'll talk about that, why they flagged that as something they wanted improved. Similarly, sustainable management criteria for chronic lowering of groundwater levels. We'll talk some about that. Also for degraded water quality. And then the 4th on the list has to do with groundwater, surface water interconnections, groundwater dependent ecosystems, beneficial uses. Next slide, please. So on the hydrogeologic conceptual model issue, the department has told us that your model is okay, but it's not good enough in terms of your description of the clays in the subsurface. They would like us to better detail out the thickness of clays in the subsurface, because they want to better understand the potential for land subsidence, and which happens when clays are compacted. And as you know, not that we have that issue here, but in the Central Valley, when land subsidence occurs, it does affect the overall yield of the basin. So these do go hand in hand in improving the model, looking more at clays, and ultimately preparing an updated sustainable yield calculation that considers land subsidence, the potential for in a little more detail. So we'll talk about what we're proposing in the budget, but this is going to be a lot of desktop work that would start early. That's how we foresee this moving forward. Next slide, please. Chronic lowering of water levels. DWR wants us to push a little bit harder with setting these chronic lowering of water levels, minimum thresholds. They didn't think we made a good case that the minimum thresholds would be protective of beneficial uses and users. We think we did. We show that the future operation of the basin will be sustainable, but we'll need to do some more work here. This and the other 2 slides I'll show you are going to also be connected. They'll dovetail with some of this work we're doing for the hydrogeologic conceptual model. On this issue, we'll be looking at wells throughout the basin, screen intervals. We'll be doing cross sections. We'll be explaining to DWR how low water levels would need to go to dry wells up. It might be that those water levels need to go lower than we're currently suggesting the minimums are. Similarly, we'll be using the model to better explain how the proposed revisions are protective of water wells and chronic lowering. Next slide, please. Water quality. So your board knows this statewide, there are big issues with water quality in the Central Valley. Sigma is definitely keyed into addressing that. There are large areas in the Central Valley that are relying on private wells that have water quality issues here and there. Clearly, the larger part of the basin, we have water quality issues, right? SCV water, though, is treating the water. The department, however, wants us to get more specific in terms of our metrics. It's not enough to say that there are many layers of regulation for water quality in the basin. The department wants us to create an additional set of metrics in the basin for this. So we do not want to reinvent the wheel here, but we do want to demonstrate how the GSA is sort of syncing up additional details in terms of regulations with how it operates the basin. It might be, and we need to look at this more in order to make this as clean and simple for the Department of Water Resources and for us. We might need to look at management areas in the basin, maybe the larger part of the basin that's primarily used by municipal use has a certain set of criteria, and the canyon areas we may need to look at differently. So this is all something that's doable, but it's going to take us to look at it a little bit differently. That's all. Next slide, please. Yes, beneficial uses and users. So this is where the department is getting into the groundwater dependent ecosystem issue again. So we will using the hydrogeologic conceptual model, we will compare more cross sections. We will look at a potential in the river system for groundwater pumping to cause dry wells or undesirable results to groundwater dependent ecosystems. We got good marks in our GSP about how we move forward with the GDE work. UWR wants more detail. And so we can certainly do that. I expect these steps that we're talking about here and with the chronic lowering of the water levels, those may cause us to really look yet again at our triggers and our minimum thresholds. But when we do it in the future, when we prepare this 5-year plan update, I think we'll have a much more solid approach at why we're setting the levels where we're setting them. So that's good. Next slide, please. Work plan development. We'll be meeting with DWR, or well, as formally as we need to work through the comments and make sure that our understanding is the same as their understanding before we get too far ahead with this. We will be developing, of course, a more detailed work plan. We're looking at teams for these 4 different efforts. We're not looking at these 4 efforts as individual consulting contracts, but more as team efforts. And we plan to get consultant contracts going shortly after today's meeting. We'll come back to your board in October with additional details then. Next slide, please. In terms of timing at a high level, we are in the first box here, the first quarter of 24, 25. These lines are not exact. These bars are not exact, but we'll spend initial effort getting the hydrogeologic conceptual model improved, because the things that follow it need to rely on it. So we can start first. The other efforts will take longer than just updating the hydrogeologic conceptual model. And then we've got preparation of the plan update is the last step, starting the 3rd quarter in 25, 26. So these may shift around a little bit. Conceptually how they fit together right now. Next slide. And then in terms of budget, the the budget before you today. Next item, that's $50,000 for the hydrogeologic conceptual model. Talk about that. For the recommended corrective actions, evaluation of these other three criteria, lowering of water levels, water quality, groundwater, surface water interactions. We'll have a team on this. We're estimating 175,000 for this year. And then outreach. We will need to get the outreach, a outreach consultant on board. Start setting up an outreach program. We're not going to do anything with outreach before we come back to your board in October, just so you know, but we need to start getting the pieces put together. Who are the interested parties? Where do we want to do the outreach to? That kind of stuff. And that completes our current look at moving forward with this. Thank you.
We do have a public comment on the presentation from Sandra Patel. Sandra, if you
Use this link.
come to the podium, make your comment.
Thank you for letting me address you today. My first comment is going to be that I could not find an online pre-meeting access to the expanded agenda. So I really didn't understand everything that was going to be happening at this meeting. And I would like to request having some way to have access to that expanded agenda. I actually have some expertise that could have helped out with 3.1, and I hope some of the things I say on 3.2 might be helpful. For years, I was talking about using reclaimed water to help replenish our groundwater rather than Ventura's groundwater. And I understand that we obviously need to evaluate how much of the water that comes from the sanitation district into the Santa Clara River is needed for maintenance of the riparian habitat and how much could be available for us to use. And I don't think that's been done, and I think the onus is on the water board to figure out how to do that. So that would really help with our groundwater sustainability. And I know it may be expensive to pump upriver, but if we're in a drought, that might be a good time to have that expense and actually do it. The other understanding I have is, as you talked about this riparian habitat, I was really excited about it. I understand that there's a possibility of infiltration of excess water that's already been purchased to an area in the east. And along with this project, it would be nice if some of that excess water would be actually put close to the river. I know you come up with an area not too far away, but it would help to restore a year-round riparian habitat. By the way, a riparian habitat is a strong habitat. The cottonwoods would not die with a few-year drought. They might look shabby, but they would not die. The smaller plants, they will die back when there's water available.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. With respect to the expanded agenda, are you referring to the presentations that were made?
Yes, and that would have explained what was going on with the Curtis property. That all I had was what was on the agenda. That's all I had access to.
Generally post the presentation. It is.
We do, and the agenda package on the website.
I didn't see it.
We'll have, for example, the technical report for the well. So suggestion, if you just got the agenda, obviously you did, right? But downloading from the website, safe bet.
I was looking for it and I couldn't find it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have discussion questions from Mr. Huggins on his presentation. Director Gunsack.
Just a couple, and I heard you say, we're gonna talk about the budget, or it affects the budget.
There are 3 items in the budget that say
This.
that last slide.
And first. Can we get an answer to Ms. Cattell on the reclaimed water? The water agency is doing the evaluation of where it makes sense, not that. It is being done.
Yeah, we've started to evaluate what's called the California Environmental Flow Framework. And we started having some discussions with CDFW. Different topics that outline in that framework. It hasn't been applied so much on river systems like ours, right? Because a lot of it was designed for river systems like up north to have continuous flow. So we're, working with them to try and develop a tool that, be applicable to our watershed. We think that's the right tool to deploy to start to answer your questions about how much water is staying.
Okay.
So that work is being started. And
Okay, great. That's good. Okay, and then. Just. Overriding thought on their comments. I mean, first of all, fabulous that ours was accepted, our GSP, because. My understanding is many were not, I don't, many is the appropriate word. But
40+% of it.
yeah, right, so congratulations on getting it adopted. And I know it's very preliminary and you're gonna be talking to them. But just talking about the clay details, this water agency and the technical level that we go to things, I find to be incredibly complex. So I would like to know, what's their standard level of detail? I mean, when you're talking about clay and susceptibility to subsidence, like, do we have to do like core measurements or something? And then is everybody else in the state doing core measurements or something? That seems like quite a complex question. If there's just gonna be an estimate of depth and a statement of typical reaction for that thickness of clay, fine, but to maintain a good working relationship is great, but I don't think we should be pressed to do the maximum technological review of, every molecule of clay in the river just because we could, if nobody else is being asked to do it, so. Then on chronic shortages, what's their definition of chronic shortages? I know from the water agency, we've long talked about that we look at well recovery based on historical drought and rainy years. If there's, and we say that it has always responded well based on the current pumping regime. If that's not enough for them, what do they want? Can they define? Maybe they did, I don't know, but what's their definition of chronic shortage? If it, is it 20 years? Is it the wells can go down? We have wells that go down, and they come back when it rains. So, we need a time frame or something, is my thought on that, to check the box that it's not chronic, because every time we have a few wells go dry, everybody's running around going, oh, we had some wells go dry, and then as soon as it rains, it comes back. So I don't think that's chronic, but I would think a definition would be helpful. Water quality, only concern there, again, water agency does a fabulous job and analyzes everything and more, but we have lack of data on private wells. So if we break it into where we do have data and we don't have data, unless we go to the step of requiring water quality data from private pumpers, which we haven't done so far. Maybe we just call out that we don't have this data. Or are they asking us to demand water quality data from wells that we don't have access to? I don't know what the ask is there beyond the reams of data that the water agency already has. That's just my overall comments. And again, I really applaud the good working relationship, and I know that we will come out well at the end, but they just seem like they keep asking for more.
Okay. Comments, questions? Comments or questions on presentation? Madam Secretary, I neglected to ask if there were any public comment online. I trust that if there were, you would have.
There is not.
Okay, very good. Covered that. All right, we have no more comments. I just would like to say, Rick, this whole groundwater sustainability effort has had undefined, many undefined criteria from the beginning. I know they've made the best effort to have countless guidance documents.
Right.
But it's not like you have an LA County hydrology book and storm drain calculation by the steps 1 through 100. Everything is a lot of judgment injected into it. So I know it's been tough. You guys have done a great job. I'm not surprised that we have some comments to address on the next update, because it seems like everyone does. But we're in much better shape than many other agencies, right? So, but a lot of this, what I'm saying now, is going to roll into the next topic, which is the budget. I give you a lot of credit for trying to come up with budget numbers on at least a lot of times undefined criteria. Your consultants don't have, well, we define their task as best we can. But I'm not sure how you hit that moving target with any great accuracy, but you've done a great job. But anyway, thanks for the presentation. I do have a question about the clay layer determination. You said it's going to be done based what they're asking for. You can do with record data, or are you going to have to get out in the field and take more soil?
The idea would be we would look at the existing electric logs in the valley. Most of them through oil and gas work that's previously done. And have a hydrogeologist interpret the E-log signature. I think that's about, I don't want to shortchange it. There's a lot of work there, but what you said, Director Woodside, is very good. Essentially, what is the standard of care to do this? Let's get that dialed in before we go too far. Borings, terribly expensive.
Yes.
That's just not on the radar.
Access is difficult.
It- it
Cost is expensive. Timing is, yeah. Let's hope we can do it on record. All right, unless there's further discussion, we can move on to the next item. Item 3.3, consideration to adopt the SCV GSA fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. We will have a presentation and then we'll have a comment.
Thank you, President Martin. Obviously, we're here talking about this item. We tried to make the staff report a little bit less dense, and today's presentation isn't going to have quite the tables in it, whatnot. Let us know at the end if we're still thinking about it, if that's the right level of detail for your report. So many of these things are repeat that we didn't think it was necessary to go into great detail again. But let's jump in. So key changes, we've got deferral of some costs, primarily field work, reinstalling piezometers, temperature probes. River conditions were in flux, we couldn't get out there to do that work, so we didn't spend that money. We're recommending putting that money in the budget forward for this next year. And then we have additional costs for responding to the DWR comments. And then we also have an additional capital budget to the GSA. So those are the key changes. We're certainly looking for the board's direction today and approval of the budget. Next slide, please. So we have now grown into an agency that has a Other than that, the budget categories are the same. We have our operating budget. Estimated SCV water staff costs, consultant costs. We now have the capital budget. Revenue categories are the same. Next slide, please. Okay, SCV water staff costs. We have increased, well, so these are the three families of staff costs, the admin support, consultant management, public outreach. This is internal stuff we did with SCV water. The recommended budget is 85,000. It's 20,000 more than what we estimated last year. Folding in more staff time to manage the new grant, as opposed to having consultants do that. Next slide, please. On to consultant costs. 3 categories. GSP developments wrapped up. Admin. We have made some adjustments to that budget. Our legal costs are higher than what we previously estimated. Part of this is related to well permitting. We also did not fold in consultant management costs for a grant in this category because SCV water plans to do that in-house. And then for GSP implementation on the right, we talked about this. We've had certain work deferred, new work coming on board to address DWR's comments. And a lot of the implementation work will be the same. We'll be preparing annual reports. We'll be filling data gaps, all these kinds of things. We're mainly highlighting the differences in the budget this year. Next slide, please. Okay, on to some highlighted budget items. ESA woodland condition monitoring. This would be a team effort. This is not a single consultant contract, even though I have erroneously named it in ESA woodlands condition monitoring. This would be consultant services for biologists, hydrologists, team. This would include using the hydrogeologic conceptual model. The approach would be we would do what we expect would be a final round of looking at NEPs. We would work in the Placerita Canyon area because that was an area that was considered high priority. And we would prepare a short report. It would describe the area, it would have some geologic cross sections. It would describe the kind of water source these upland habitat need. The whole idea is to focus on it and put a bow on this and move forward. So we're recommending 30,000 for that. We have the evergreen issue, the capital planning and studies. This changes a little bit in different budget cycles. In the past, we have thought this might be useful for something with Bouquet Canyon. But that's moving in its own direction now, though we still think it could be useful for something with looking at infiltration testing in the basin. The round 2 implementation grant. 180,000. This would include a new consultant contract to do the valley-wide review of well records and other implementation steps. Next slide, please. Additional consultant efforts for 3 items on the left. We talked about these already, the hydrogeologic conceptual model, the other technical support and outreach. And we have also included a contingency like we did last year, 10%, which rolls up to $100,000. Next slide, please. Okay, so the roll up for the task 2 budget items, big picture. The proposed budget is certainly larger than last year's for the reasons we've talked about. Deferral of work, additional consultant work to help with addressing DWR comments. And we've had some other relatively small adjustments to consultant efforts regarding grants and legal fees. And we've got new grants, and new expenses. Fortunately, under the new grant, the work is subject to 100% reimbursement. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the capital budget. So, with the new capital budget, we are forecasting a year-end expenditures of approximately 100,000 for a well siting study, which is wrapping up. That includes some staff time. The team has been, well, we have evaluated quite a few locations in the valley for these deep monitoring wells. We're honing in on the best spots we have now. So that's wrapping up. For moving forward, we plan to do CEQA and permitting and start construction next year. We're estimating $3 million for that. Again, these are subject to 100% reimbursement under the grant, but of course the costs have to be carried initially. Next slide, please. The roll up on table 5, really, we're just getting into revenues. So we anticipate grant reimbursement revenue of approximately $1 million for the year. We'll carry forward. The additional revenue required above what we anticipate for reimbursement is 300,000. So we carry that forward and search for reimbursement for that next year. This will be a multi-year project, so it's like any grants, reimbursements are always in arrears, always a lot farther back because of how long it takes to process things. Next slide, please. Wrapping up. So your board now has the proposed operating budget. We've talked about the key changes in it. Additional revenue required is currently shown at $992,000. The proposed capital costs are significant, 1.3 million. However, those are also 100% recoverable. And next slide, please. And so our recommendation is that your board adopt the operating budget detailed in tables 1 through 3, and the capital budget detailed in tables 4 through 5, and then consistent with how we do this each year, replace the administrative services agreements budget with these new budget tables. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rick, for your presentation. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments? I have your cards.
Not.
Good. And open it to questions and discussion from the board. Start in Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Beer Boots, I noticed that, let me know if this is correct. I'm sorry, I should have let me. So it appears that our administrative costs are estimated to increase by $20,000, while the consulting costs are decreasing $10,000. And I believe you said that was primarily due to grant applications being prepared in-house. Is that correct?
Yes, not so much grant applications at this point, but just the administration of the grant. You're in-house.
All right, so if staff costs are going up $20,000, consulting costs are going down $10,000, so we're coming out short about $10,000, and $10,000 may not seem like a lot when you're talking about a $1.1 million budget, but 10,000 here and 10,000 there, pretty soon we're talking real money. Is it prudent for us to bring it in-house?
I think it is, and one of the reasons why you see that difference, 20,000 higher and in table 2. The second table 2, consultant cost estimate for administration. Director Natoli, we did not load consultant costs in the budget, which is one reason why it looks like we're spending more. Last year, when we estimated this budget, we weren't sure if we were gonna get there. So we didn't include consultant cost estimates for grant administration. If we were to toggle this and say, take the $20,000 increment from staff, apply it to consultant. I'm confident we'd be looking at 30 or 35,000. So I do think it's more affordable. And also more efficient. We've got a strong team of people to do this now.
I'm actually pleased that we would be bringing it in-house. It seems to work better, I think, when people who are implementing a plan or a policy are actually the ones who work on it. I think there's a history that goes with that, and there's the institutional knowledge. So I'm pleased that the numbers actually work out in our favor. And then my other question was, you talked about 100% reimbursement and how long it takes. How long does it typically take for us to get that reimbursement?
Six or 9 months typically, sometimes longer. Invoices go in quarterly, so we've got to burn the whole quarter. And then we have 15 days or a month to send the invoice up to the FUR, and then they have their time to review it. Sometimes there's follow-up questions, so yeah, 6 months, 9 months, it lasts.
That's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it's still bad enough. Thank you, Mr. Viergens. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very good. Nothing, Brett, you're gonna say.
Couple quick questions. And I know we talked about the woodlands before. I continue to be confused about upland versus GDE, because, you know, I think upland here, I think of the oaks on the hills, and for instance, Placerita Canyon is mentioned. Seems like it's probably nowhere near the groundwater. I understand this is a wrap up. Is there a way to wrap up looking at the oaks that are likely groundwater dependent and not looking at oaks that are out of the purview of the agency? Really, because they're not groundwater dependent? I mean, we're spending money on something that's not our obligation to study.
So, yeah, I hear you, and part of two things. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because we said we would do it. We developed the GSP.
But all oaks or groundwater dependent oaks?
No, not all oaks, just, we were just gonna focus in some upland areas to see if there was a case that they were
Okay,
somehow connected to the groundwater system.
Okay.
So I might have missed your other question in that, but
well, no, okay, so that makes sense. So we are making the case with this work that these are focused on GDEs. And the community wanted to make sure that some of these other areas aren't GDEs. And so we're going to do a double check of those for that reason. Is that
that's
essentially?
correct.
Okay, okay. And then I remember the Oak report. I remember the presentations. I would hope in the wrap up that it's really clear that, you know, this in the future, these are where we're gonna look and why, and we're not gonna look in these other areas. Or maybe the criteria of what makes a GDE, so that other people say, hey, look at these over here, or what about this canyon? There has to be some screening criteria for when we think it might be a GDE, and we don't go looking at trees and bushes everywhere.
Right, the way I imagine it rolling forward is we put a bow on it and say, we said we'd do it, but we said we would do it back when we weren't entirely sure we had some data gaps.
Right.
Now we're confident these outlet areas are not affected by the regional water table.
Right.
That's how I imagine.
So this is truly the wrap up, okay. And then. Yeah, also it is going up by about 30%. I think you gave us a long-term plan before, but do we
hopefully expect this to level off once the work is complete.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah,
And I think so.
they're not adding
That-
more right now, are they?
And right now, we have, no. But we have a target, which is January 2027, we get 5-year update. Done the best to do that, we talked about that. So then the question is, will DWR layer on
Right.
new things after that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we don't know.
I'll be.
That's right.
Okay.
I'll be going to a groundwater resources association conference in Sacramento this week. That's a good question for us to ask DWR.
Yeah,
Once we hit this 5-year milestone, are we on cruise control?
Mm-hmm.
We back off.
yeah,
Big wheel.
right. I see all that shaking. I was shaking his head.
Yes, I hear him chuckling behind me.
I mean, I mean, it,
He's
you
trying
know,
to take it though.
the statement is like, can we do it? Yes. Can everybody do it? No. And is it fair that, you know, we study the wazoo out of it and some little area outside of Porterville is not gonna spend $1,300,000 a year? So where's the fairness or even playing field? Because if anything, those areas should probably be studied better and ours should be acceptable at a certain point. I would hope that that would be something they could decide, you know, where's the goalpost?
Yeah, me too. I imagine, I'd like to see us in the future. I do a 5-year update. We'll have to do 5-year updates every 5 years. We'll have to do annual reports. There's a certain carrying cost that's probably higher than what we'd like it to be anyway.
Right.
But I do hope that in the future it gets reduced. We've got an up and running groundwater model.
Right.
There will always be costs to maintain that and update it either in the GSA family or through SCV water. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, well, and yeah, I know you, again, you're engaged with them and will provide appropriate feedback, nice, at the right time, but yeah. It's I remember when it was discussed initially and it was a much smaller number and we thought it was kind of one and done and it is not proving to be that.
Yeah, and to comment that what President Martin said, you know, we've done well with what we've had. It's taken a lot of judgment. Carefully moving forward. The Department of Water Resources still hasn't released its guidance on groundwater surface water. So we know a lot about it, but what we really need to know is what DWR wants.
Right.
To see.
Okay.
So.
And then the guidance has to be. Or soft or in the eye of the beholder or.
Right.
All right, any questions for the Bruce? Okay, I will say I appreciate the effort made to make the budget numbers understandable through all your tables and your line items. And you do have my sympathy for trying to estimate cost, firm estimate on cost for things that aren't as well defined as they would be in other cities. So with that, I'd entertain a motion for approval. Director Cooper.
So moved to adopt the budget.
Okay. The action as recommended in the staff report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Dr. Cooper?
Yes.
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 Dr. Mark?
Yes.
Dr. Natoli? President Gibbs?
Aye.
Dr. Martin?
Yes,
Thank you. Item 3.3 has passed.
very good. Got for another year. Thank you, Mr. Vergoose. We can now move on to item 4, Executive Director's Report, presented by Mr. Cole. Mr.
Very brief, thank you, Reverend Morgan, back in Northfield. Just want to thank Greg for all these efforts, obviously, a lot of this comes on his shoulders, and he's been doing a tremendous job with it. This budget will enable us to go to the next phase, so more sustainability activities for the valley, so that is a good thing. Just one item, Rick already mentioned, both Rick and Mr. Allen's son are going to go to Sacramento this week to go and hear about groundwater sustainability agency activities with the Groundwater Resources Association. So I think lessons learned and where's the future going. So appreciate both of them committing the time to get up with that. I'm sure they'll bring back very clear outcomes. And that's that concludes my show. Thank you.
There is mud.
Do we have any public comment on Mr. Cole's report?
We do not.
Any questions from the board on this report? Sure. Steve, appreciate it. We can move on to item 5, director requests for future agenda items. Are there any director requests for future agenda items? That's your unchanged. Director Goodson.
I wanted to see if we could get maybe a brief summary, if this is the place to be to hear the news about the future of GSAs and GSBs. Summary of your conference. 20 minutes or less, 10 minutes at the next
Absolutely.
meeting.
Thank you, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and if there's any other source for, future projections from DWR, let us know where it's going, where we're going. Kind of thing. That's all.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other director requests for future agenda? We are complete with item 5. Move to item 6, adjournment. Please remember that our next meeting, which will be the first Monday in October, will be at 1 o'clock on 2:30. Come at 2:30, you're going to be watching people leave. So
And at our new boardroom.
Pardon
Right? New location as well.
that's correct. We will probably will be our last, unless there's an emergency GSA or a special GSA board meeting, it'll be back over at what will then be known as the E.G. Jerry Gladbeck Water Treatment Board. Okay. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.